My guest today is David Stewart, a musician, author, and YouTuber. It's difficult not to fanboy too much with creators whose work I've been following for years, especially David's outstanding literature and storytelling analyses on his channel. I've spent many hours listening to his advice, even sometimes taking notes. You can almost feel wisdom radiating from the screen as he discusses the philosophies of the Jedi and the Sith, or the countless pitfalls of manufactured storytelling, or the various skirmishes in what history may call the Great American Culture War. I recently had the pleasure of providing a cover illustration of Corona-chan for one of David's anthologies, and we even made it to #1 in our genre on Amazon together, which was a huge treat, so thanks, Disease. Links to all those will be in the description. Now, in keeping with my recent tradition, I'm trying to do more rolling starts with these interviews. My guests and I have such good, relaxed conversations before we begin recording, and then suddenly we freeze up when it's time to introduce ourselves. As you'll hear in a second, we begin in media res and then work our way backwards into all kinds of fascinating subjects. Fascinating to me, at least. I do warn you all, I'm an American, but I'm aggressively Greek as well. I can and will talk about philosophy for hours at a time, and there will be no apology. Oh, by the way, did you know that the Greek word for apology, apologia, doesn't actually mean to say that you're sorry? It's to give a justification or defense for your position. The root prefix of this word is apo, which means away, and then the suffix is logia, of course, which is logic. So the explanation of my away position, which makes no sense as the word apology, but it doesn't have to because Greeks just operate on a higher plane of existence, I guess. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules. And of course, philosophy is, of course, taken from philo, which is a sort of a friend or lover of something. So, Philadelphia, right? That's the famous one, city of brotherly love, which is really the city of getting stabbed. But that's another story. And the other half of philosophy is Sophia, which means wisdom. So a philosophy is a lover of wisdom. And if you just slipped into a philological coma, you may feel the need to skip the first 15 minutes of this conversation. Contrarily, if you got excited by what I just said, venture forth bravely. Either way, I hope you guys enjoy my conversation with David Stewart. I certainly did. And I hope you guys are encouraged by it to check out his awesome work if you haven't already. All right, enjoy. On the topic of arguing in bad faith, I've noticed that people use philosophy in multiple ways. One of them is to win arguments. And obviously I'm Greek, so I have the background of, I was raised around these people all the time. They just want to win arguments, so they pretend to be wise. And then there's the types who actually pursue knowledge, like they love wisdom. That's what philosophy means, of course. They want to pursue truth as its own end, not to argue with people and, be like gorillas beating their own chest. And you were mentioning some of the people you've encountered in these debates.
Yeah, so I think you nailed it. Most people are not interested in, a debate is one thing, but just a conversation. They're not really interested in what you have to say or like where you came to your conclusions. What they want to do, it's mostly, I think, when it comes to online stuff, I think it's mostly attention seeking. They're looking to, affirm their own thoughts about things, and you can smell it right away. If you've been doing it as long as I have, you can smell right away the difference between a really honest comment and a comment that is really directed towards it's a non-conversational comment. So if people come out of the gates with insults or they accuse you of dishonesty, that's a big red flag for anyone trying to involve themselves in a debate or in just a conversation. Is that they are poisoning the well for anyone that's watching, and are declaring you bad before you even begin talking to them. So there's really nothing. You're not gonna find any common ground there. What you're gonna find is a person who's wholly obsessed with trying to be what I call a secret king, or what other people call secret kings too, which is like they're secretly really smart. And if people only knew them, then they would know how secretly super smart they really were. And the fact that this happens on online debates, or, and YouTube comments and on Twitter and places like that, just lets you know that these people are not really interested in conversations. They don't act like this around real people. But if you get somebody that comes in, it's like, hey, I disagree with you. I think this. That's the person who honestly has a disagreement or honestly has something to say. And that's a person you could probably talk to. It all comes down to the execution and the tone. That's the first giveaway. And I know that that's, that would technically be a kind of fallacy. Call it a fallacy, or, somebody, I don't like somebody's tone, therefore I'm not going to talk to them. But it signals a lot what they are actually going to be saying to you and where their placement is to you. If they come at you with insults or something, they're not really interested in having a conversation with you.
What do you think is the motive then? It's a sort of, this is a cheesy way to put it, but I'm typing at my computer, I'm alone in a room, and I'm just sending thoughts into the ether. And then words come from somewhere else onto my screen, and now I'm arguing with words on my screen.
Arguing with magic words. You're arguing with magic voices. Yeah,
What are these people doing? It's like they're sending prayers, and then they're getting their prayers answered.
That's what it is. It's kind of like prayer. What they want is they want to be told that they're good. And they want to affirm their self-image that they're good. So there's an identity thing going on there. And I don't mean an identity thing like in terms of ethnicity, like psychological identity, like who you are on a psychological level. It's people who have identity disorders. Psychologically, they have issues with affirming who they are and what they're good at and things like that. So this is just them affirming their own psychological biases. That's their goal, is to make themselves feel better about what they already believe, not to change what they believe, not to hear what someone else believes or to come to an understanding of why someone else thinks something different from them, but rather to simply affirm what they already believe.
I see.
And so that's just what it is. It's why people are, and then people can be jerks for another reason. And the other reason is because once you remove the social repercussions of behavior, which of course happens in online discourse because people use avatars or their Xbox Live handle or whatever. Like there's that meme. I'm not usually racist, except when I'm on Xbox Live.
I see.
Or
anonymous, yeah.
Unless I'm on Xbox Live, I'm not usually racist.
Yeah.
But when I get on Xbox Live, it's once you make someone anonymous and you give them an audience, you'll find that they will deregulate their speech, or they trying to think of the right word here, but they like downregulate their filter, their speech filter. So they aren't really thinking about they're either not thinking about what other people think about that, or they're directly trying to make somebody feel bad because that gives them a kind of psychic release. It's kind of like punching somebody you don't like. It's them imaginary punching somebody they don't like. Yes. That's why they come in, saying calling people poopy head and stuff. They're calling you poopy head, not because they really think you're poopy head, but because they don't like you and they want you to feel bad. And it's up to you whether they can be successful at that. Once you're fully aware of it, then it really does. We're normal social beings. So people who step into the online arena and aren't used to this or haven't been subjected to it to a certain degree, they think that this is real and that they maybe really are bad, rather than understanding that this is a psychological response that people have that's done through the internet. The internet causes them to act this way, when if you were to meet them in real life, they might be just a completely normal person.
Right, because in real life they're... Sorry.
Yeah, that's the truth. Is like you could meet them in real life and they might end up being a totally normal dude.
Yeah. Well, there are consequences in real life to, say, being an unhinged jerk, let's say.
Yeah.
There's obvious physical repercussions, but then things like your reputation will follow you around. So a lot of jerks, let's say, value their anonymity because they want to be able to get away with what. I guess I'm not an expert on Jungian stuff, but they call this the id, right? Where it's like my basest desires, my darkest desires. I'm just gonna let it off the leash and let it do do and say whatever it wants.
Yeah, I think I think it's either that or just it's purely malicious. Like there's a psychological satisfaction. You know, have you ever heard that like people like let off steam by going and like punching a punching bag?
Sure.
It's the physical manifestation of that frustration. Is they're upset and so they want to harm somebody else. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what they get. Yeah, I think you're probably right. It is like kind of the basest desires. They just want other people to suffer. And with the keyboard, your only option is to name call people. And unfortunately, we're conditioned through normal social interactions to actually care about people calling us names. And it's only through, I guess, the chastisement, the torture of internet life that you can become immune to that. You know? And if you don't become totally immune, you just become very resistant to it because you're aware of what people are doing.
I see. Yeah, there's I don't mean to completely make this the topic of the conversation. For anyone listening, we were talking about this before we started recording, and it was so interesting. I had to start. But I do find this interesting and it does relate to part of, or let's say the line of questioning that eventually will lead to why uniquely you're qualified to talk about these things. And why it's interesting is things like why is it good to, for instance, block people on Twitter, let's say.
Oh, yeah.
If they're arguing in bad faith, really all they're trying to do is waste your time as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you...
And that's most, honestly, and you could tell the difference right away. Most people argue in bad faith, again, because they're trying to make you look bad. And so if you're on a public forum, one of the things you have to remember is debate almost never happens for the two people debating. That's not the purpose of the debate. The purpose of the debate is to display information to onlookers, not for one person to convince the other. That almost never happens because people aren't going to step into a debate unless they're sure of their position. That's why it's like for most of them, I call them a conversation. It's like, if I'm not sure of my position, then I'll converse with somebody about it. But if I'm pretty sure of my position, then you better be very, very convincing, or I'm not even going to consider it. But most of the things, it's not, we're not dealing with black and white all the time either. Most positions require a certain amount of subtlety to them. They're not 100% one way or the other, or people get kind of bogged down into what I call the dualistic fallacy, which basically views everything as an on or off switch, and there's no positive or negative repercussions for either one of those choices. So most things, and the truth is with debate, most of the time, if you clearly define your terms, there's really no debate. Most debate occurs around people wanting to use, and this is very, very present in modern internet lingo, they want to use different meanings for words. And that's really where the debate happens, is that they have a definition for words such as justice. They'll redefine justice to be something which is not justice. And then you're basically having a debate over the meaning of the word justice, but they're using that definition to back up whatever position they have on some social justice item that they happen to believe very, very strongly on. There's certain positions, and I'm not going to say the right is not also guilty of this, but the left, it's more apparent right now. A lot of the positions are built on kind of a very complex assemblage of terms that have been carefully modified and redefined to have, basically, you're dealing with a different semiological language. So there's really not a lot of debate that can happen because you're speaking different languages. If justice doesn't mean the same thing to two people, you can't really have a debate about the criminal justice system, right? You're just going to talk past each other.
I see.
Go ahead.
Sorry. It's sort of like saying, I'll fight you, but only on in this specific arena that you have to come to.
Yeah. Come on my show and fight me. This is a thing with like comics Twitter.
Yeah.
Why don't you come on the show full of people that hate you, and we'll let them decide. It's like, no, that's completely ridiculous.
It's not neutral ground. So that's one of the telltale signs that this is not an actual discussion. It's just, I mean, there's a difference between debate, which is, I guess, there has to be a winner and a loser. But what we're more interested in, what we've been discussing, is this sort of, I don't know if this is the proper terms, but like, say there's a hypothesis you make a hypothesis, I make a hypothesis, we challenge each other's ideas. There's the antithesis there. And by challenging each other, we can find synthesis. That's what they say, apparently. So we both enrich ourselves and each other by discussing and challenging our ideas. And we say, okay, we're both winners because we both learned something. But
and that's why I tend to say a discussion or a conversation rather than a debate, because people coming in like I'm gonna try to embarrass this person, I'm gonna try to win, rather than trying to actually discover what that person maybe actually believes or how they came to that conclusion, what kind of logic is underlying their their position. And you mentioned arguing in bad faith. This is something that happens a lot. So I talked about this recently on I did a stream with Brian Niemeyer. He's another author on Don't Give Money to People That Hate You, this book you wrote. And in it, we talk about this thing called the witch test, which is something that we do on social media. Me and a bunch of other people have done it. Basically, somebody comes in and says, you're a Christian, therefore you should do this thing that I say. And so your response is, declare that Jesus is the Christ and that God raised him from the dead. Make a declaration of faith. In other words, are you a Christian? Declare that you're a Christian before we'll debate. And the reason is because then they'll go, oh, I don't believe it's some crazy sky god. It's okay. You're arguing in bad faith. Because when you tell somebody, when you're trying to convince somebody to do something that you want them to do, and you are appealing to the authority that they recognize, if you don't believe it's an authority, that's an argument from a false premise. So that's not one that you ever have to recognize or do anything with. If somebody's saying your principles or your religion says this, if they're trying to tell you what your religion says, and they themselves don't believe the religion has any merit or value, then they're arguing from bad faith. And this is something that you get a lot. And the bad faith argument is because this is like logic 101. You can't say that a conclusion is true if one of the premises are false. So that person's arguing from a premises that he believes is false. So you believe that the argument is invalid. We don't need to continue. But if you do declare your faith, then I might be more willing to listen to you. But more than that, just tactically, then you can take the discussion immediately to the spiritual level. Or, well, let's immediately, since you're talking about religion, let's immediately go to the theology and religion. And that's where they're weak. They're not really prepared to talk about religion. What they want to do is they want to try to shame you for not doing something that they think they want people to do, like bring migrants in during Christmas or something weird, like whatever it is, every religious holiday season, it pops up that like, basically it comes down to Republicans bad, It's like Jesus and Mary were refugees. It's like, they were just going where Herod told them to go. They weren't really refugees. They're going back home.
Yeah. I've seen this kind of, I guess it's sort of, how do I put this? They have to construct these frameworks from which, all right, say, let's, as an example, I'm going to create an argument for you. Basically, I'm just trying to agree with you, is what I'm trying to say. But like, okay, so you're entering my house. Now come into this room, and if you agree with everything in this room, I want you to come in this other room. And then I'm going to have you go through 5 different rooms where each one, like a finger trap, if you try to back out of each room, you have to leave something behind. You have to lose a position to the point where if you try to leave the house and back out, you're now left with nothing, argument-wise. And I've run into this kind of thing with cultists, especially.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in like a, abstract Conan the Barbarian way. I mean like variations of certain denominational beliefs, let's say, where they try to construct... Their whole faith is constructed on take this verse, take these words from this verse, and this translation of this verse, and they create this weird little ecosystem where if this is true, then this is true, then this is true, and therefore my, what do they call that? Exegetical or eisegetical argument. Anyway, I'm sorry. But basically I'm agreeing when they debate, they're doing it in a way to say like, you are now trapped and you have to agree with me. You have no way out of this, where it's just, I don't know. To me, it's barbaric. It's like flexing. It's
Well, it's all word games or word spells.
yeah.
The idea, people who are just operating in the truth or operating in the true realm, you don't really need to do all of this kind of complex leading of the subject. If you read Plato, there's quite a bit of this where Socrates would like lead people through these many different maxims, basically to show that their conclusion wasn't really built on any kind of foundation. They kind of believed things without reasons. And that's something that a lot of people have come to believe that is somehow philosophy, or they call it like a Socratic dialogue, and that's not really true. The whole point of any kind of debate that's built on premises is that you have a correct logical argument has a set of premises that you assume are true, or you've decided are true with whomever you're talking to. And then you have an inference, and you can make errors all the way through that. So if you have logic that's each inference is to build a new premise, then it's one of those things that you have to take the entire argument from the get-go and then go down to the little pieces. I've seen people do this where they start with one little thing. They're like, is this true? And then they do make maybe a little leap, and you're missing a couple of inferences before they get to the conclusion there. And the whole point is just to kind of just trap somebody trap somebody in a conclusion that they didn't realize how they got there. There's all kinds of little sophistic tricks that people do to get there. Most arguments, I think, are pretty straightforward. If you're just going to make an argument for something, make a pretty straightforward argument. It's this because of this.
I see. I guess I notice a pattern of people deciding on the conclusion and then looking for arguments to support it. And that goes
and it's the same thing if somebody attacks you online.
Yeah.
They have a feeling, and they're just looking to make that feeling feel more accurate. It's kind of like an exercise in faith. So the reason atheists have this terrible reputation online is that many of them are exercising their faith online by doing all these sorts of things, by trying to attack other people, trying to insult them, making bad faith arguments. And you realize that they're just really exercising their faith. They're trying to feel better about they're trying to confirm their non-belief in God, if you can try to wrap your head around confirming a non-belief. But that's really what that is. They want to try to confirm to themselves that there's no God, and that other people who believe in God are crazy. It's not all atheists, but that's a lot of the classic online atheists. The types.
Yeah, they were prevalent, I want to say, 5-ish years ago over then? Like The Amazing Atheist and what's that guy? He's the fiance of Shoe on Head.
Chris Ray Gunn?
He was one of them. Yeah, there was a lot of debating and snarky.
The Armored Skeptic.
Armored Skeptic, yes. I used to watch a bunch of his videos.
Chris Ray Gunn was with, what's her face? Sex Plus girl. Lacey Green.
Lacey Green, yes.
Yeah, I haven't paid attention to them in so long, like I just don't even think about it really anymore. But yeah, I remember that was kind of a big thing, the so-called skeptic community. Yeah. And what I realized about the skeptic community pretty early on, first of all, they didn't like being called a skeptic community because they wanted to believe they were all little individual snowflakes that came to their conclusions however they were. But they've almost never really thought deeply about some of the things that they actually have significant faith in. And one of them is they think, a lot of them are adherents to what I call scientism, which is just a belief that this amorphous thing called science presents good options. It's the idea that, scientists made GMO corn, therefore GMO corn is safe. Right. Or, it's going to be good. GMO corn's good because science came up with it. Science says this, therefore it's good. That you believe in this kind of church called science. Science doesn't really work that way. Science operates. Science doesn't really look like science. That's the other thing, too. Most science is done through tinkering, not through the scientific method. But that's neither here. That's a whole different discussion. So that's what I kind of figured out. A lot of them is they have their own faith. They just aren't fully aware of it because they don't, and they're exercising their faith through their constant proclamations, their it's kind of like their creed. You have to spit out your creed. That's part of having a religion.
I see. Well, earlier, before we started recording, you mentioned about building your computer, and that actually
Yeah.
reminds me. One of the things that I sometimes chew on is that we humans are sort of built. We're like computers, let's say, but there's so many different types of operating systems that you could install in a human brain, in the sense of like a morality system or an ethical system. Tradition, of course, those are historical, whatever, things that can be installed in the human brain. But say, like, what is the difference between right and wrong? If you had asked a Mongolian in the middle of Genghis Khan's, reign, let's say, they would have said, pillaging and murdering everybody was a good thing, and those people deserved it because they weren't strong enough to defend themselves. And depending on different places and times that you go to, a different person might have a different answer for that. I think it's interesting that, let's say, I mean, not to dwell on this topic too long, I do think it's interesting about, say, atheists, skeptics, and all that sort of thing. If they don't have a religious framework for their ethical system, let's say, they sort of have to, buffet style, collect their own.
Yeah.
But I say this as an agnostic myself, just to be fair in the discussion. But I would not go so far as to say atheist or anything.
Yeah, there's highly systematized secular versions of ethics that have been around for a while. The thing is, most of the people that are atheists reject the secular proofs of ethics because they basically tell them that they're acting and doing things unethically. That's one of the things there's a reason all the secular atheist proofs of ethics are always towards like libertarian ideals. And it's because if you're going to follow ethics, that's where you end up in a secular sense. So you have either two realms, which is that there's no systematized ethics, which is what I think most atheists end up really believing. The amazing atheist said that at one point very honestly. He said that I don't believe that there's any such real thing as right and wrong. There's only things that we can decide, completely nihilistic. Or you end up going the Ayn Rand, Stefan Molyneux route of having a highly systematized version of ethics that's universal or near universal, but it always leads you towards, some version of the silver rule, which is don't do to others what you wouldn't have them do unto you. It basically ends up with a more right-wing leaning position than left-wing. And for whatever reason, atheists always end up kind of more on the left than the right. And I think that has to do with that, if you don't like, I think they kind of start on the left and then they just kind of, like you said, buffet. I'll have some of this, some of that, some of this ethics, some of that ethics. I'll practice yoga, even though I'm an atheist. I'll do right. Yoga is like an Indian spiritual thing, and it's so weird. I know this is a complete tangent, but it's so weird to see people do yoga in the United States. It's just such a weird thing when you actually look at where it came from. We have agnostic or atheist Americans doing yoga all the time for fitness. It's like, that's not what it was for.
Yeah. There's, anytime you introduce, let's say, an external culture to a sort of, how do I put this? Cosmopolitan? I don't want to sound like one of those people, but let's say comfortable people, when you introduce them to something ancient
and engendered. Yeah.
There's something flavorful about that where it's like, what's this type of food? I want to try it. And, I want to eat nothing but this and gorge myself on it. It's like, that's not really what it was meant for.
Yeah. It goes back to an old saying an ethnomusicologist told me, which is that authenticity is made, not discovered, which is to say, for people who, let's say we're talking about some kind of ethnic music in West Africa, right? I don't know. For the people, the tribesmen who practice that music and play it, it's not special. It's just music, right? That's just the music they play. It only becomes, quote, authentic West African music once the white people pick it up and bring it back over to the West, where they promote it as authentic West African music. if you were to bring over rock and roll for these guys and let them hear it, they might just start putting rock and roll stuff into their music because they like it, and they wouldn't think twice about authenticity.
I see.
You know what I mean? Because it doesn't matter to them. It's just their music. It's theirs.
I see. So music is just music. It's only when you compare it to other music, I suppose, you get
it's when you export it to a different culture. Then you have to create authenticity. It's just an idea that's created. Like authentic sushi. It's like you go over to Japan. There's like a tuna in sushi, right? You can't get tuna except like from the West. So the tuna is flown into Japan to have this authentic Japanese sushi. Tuna is not from Japan. You know, so you got fish in it that you literally can't fish out of the waters near Japan. Not in any kind of, you know, you'd have to go pretty far out in the ocean.
I see.
You get all of this, Pacific or Atlantic tuna catch flown over to Japan for sushi.
I guess the word we're looking at is novelty.
Yeah, it's a novelty thing. Anyway, we wanted to talk about the computer, right? We got a pretty far afield there.
There's so many really these conversations, and I'm so sorry for everyone listening. It's sort of like I have my own RPG right now, and there's this giant dialogue wheel in front of me, and there's so many things I want to ask you, and they're all in different directions.
Yeah.
But all right, so before we were talking about PCs and building your own PC. So I'll just say we can start there, but what I want to get to is the topic of discipline and working from home as well. So we're starting with PCs, but that's where I would like to go. So if I veer off course, I'm sorry ahead of time.
Yeah. Okay. So we were talking about, my wife has been using my computer because she's a speech pathologist. So she's been having to do a lot of like remote work with video conferencing. And obviously I have a setup that's really good for that. I run a YouTube channel that is really heavily based on me sitting in front of my computer for the most part. I do sometimes go out on location and do videos elsewhere, but for the most part, it's in here. So she's been using it during the day. And I was saying, I'm really glad that I overbuild my computers. I always build them way past whatever the current accepted spec of what you need is. So, my computer is about 5 years old now, and I still see people building gaming PCs that are basically the same spec of this computer, just maybe with a newer video card. Mine's like a GTX 980 or something, and so those are old now. And now you'd get like an 1180, right? You'd get the newest NVIDIA model in your computer, but otherwise it's not that much more capable. It's people building computers with the same amount of RAM I have, 64 gigs of RAM. Processors may be a little faster, but it still runs everything. Can run any modern game, no problems. And it's orders of magnitude more powerful than my PS4. But that means that I don't have to buy a new computer very often. And I was telling George, I built this really badass computer only partly to play games. I do a lot of stuff. I record music, or do video editing, and record videos. The thing that I do the most of now, which is writing books, I can do on like a phone at this point. But I do a lot of graphical work. Photoshop, of course, likes to eat RAM like a fat guy at an all-you-can-eat seafood buffet. So I need like a good computer to run all of that stuff. But anyway, I built this great computer originally because I was going to play a lot of games on it. I've been a PC gamer for like 30 years at this point. And one of the things I realized, especially after my first child was born, is that it's really good to have your workspace and your, I don't know what to call it, a play space, be separate physical spaces. So when I come in, I don't really play PC games very much unless I'm playing them on stream. When I come into my office, it is to do work, to do my creative work, to write books or work on music or do videos or something like that. So I don't ever feel like I have to sit down on my computer and play a game. And if I have a bunch of games on here, and like when I was playing WoW Classic, that was kind of a little bit of a problem. It reminded me of this, was that I bought a PlayStation and put my gaming stuff out in the living room so that I wouldn't feel so distracted in front of my computer. If there's a game I really want to play, I'd probably prefer to have it on PlayStation so I I just don't have the temptation when I sit down to work.
Mm-hmm.
If I had this new, great game that everyone's playing and it was on my PC, every time I sat down to open up my Word document, I'd be looking at that and be like, I'll just play for 20 minutes and then I'll work. And then I just wouldn't get any work done.
Yeah.
So like last year with WoW Classic, it was a thing where like, I'm going to sit down and I'll be like, I'll just play the auction house for a minute. I'll just do a quest.
Yeah.
I got to go to bed.
My goodness.
Well,
especially Blizzard games, right? It's there's that it's like a snack. You can have a little bit, and then you're full. And it's been hours. You mentioned Hearthstone. I used to be super into Hearthstone, and then I would waste entire days.
Yeah, I played a lot during alpha and beta.
Yeah.
And my wife played too. She played on her phone once they had a phone client before they went.
She has good eyes. I can't do that.
I have it on my phone right now, and I was gonna do a little content on it. And it was kind of weird. I took years off from the game, and I came back specifically to review it a little bit and just talk about the state of the game. As far as I've been doing kind of these little mini mobile game reviews to talk about monetization stuff and kind of how they psychologically get you.
Yeah.
And that one, I realized it was really bad at a certain point when they started changing all the cards to be very focused on RNG, like random number, like have random effects. And once you have random effects to that degree, because you get your cards at random, you have random effects for those cards. Basically, you started walking into any match you could lose for RNG purposes. That doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
It's one thing to be outplayed. It's one that like I just didn't get the cards. It's another to be like I got the cards, I outplayed this person, and I still lost because they used this RNG card and it went their way. 50% of the time they win because that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. So I stopped playing for a long time and I came back and I realized it was pretty much just as bad as ever. Very, very pay to win. But you could easily lose a lot of time playing Hearthstone. And this is really funny. I remember really liking Hearthstone back during beta because it took so much less time to play than Magic the Gathering. I was like, this is a huge improvement.
Yeah. I remember, what was it? There was a certain expansion where the lead designer or something left the company or something like that, and everyone was complaining about certain changes that they were making. Like, for instance, they had wild mode, and
yes, that was when I quit. I think it was about that time.
Same with me. Yeah, what happened with me was I realized this game is changing so much that with every new expansion, it's like a new game completely. And the game I used to like has changed. And I gave myself that as an opportunity to get out because I was spending way too much time playing it.
Yeah, me too. I kind of felt the same way. And this was before I had kids, I think. So it wasn't, it was a good time to step out. It's one of those games that like, it would be fine to play a couple games here and there. And I didn't have that much problems with it, but you get kind of invested. So this is a couple ways that they get you. And I kind of want to make some specific content towards this, but we'll just talk about it on your show a little bit. There's a reason all of these game companies go for RNG and they go for random items that you get out of card packs, like with Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering or like loot boxes. There's a reason they go with all this stuff. And there's a reason that they change the contents of the game, like the cards that you're using, to shift the meta. There's a reason they do all this stuff, and it's to keep you at the table. You're like a gambler,
sure, and
you want to keep that gambler at the table however you can. So casinos know this. This is exactly the same thing casinos do. They give you free drinks. And you're losing way more money than the free drinks cost them, and they can write off every ounce of liquor they pour.
And it makes you make worse decisions.
Makes you make worse decisions. You get liquored up.
Yeah.
You feel like you're getting something for free. You feel like you're getting rewarded for it. So they reward you with garbage, right? Hearthstone's full of these little rewards. You get this other hero for the same class that you have. You get a card back for playing some games. Mm-hmm. Great. Those aren't real. Those aren't real rewards. Those aren't things that you can't hold them in your hands. You get cards. Here's a free pack of cards. You can't give those cards to someone. They aren't real. If I pick up a pack of Magic cards, I can open them up, look at the cards, and be like, here you go, dude. These are yours. I could give them away, or I could tear them up and destroy them. I could trade them for something else I want. You can't do that in Hearthstone. And they kind of figure this out with digital goods is you are attaching this belief in collecting things to something which isn't real and you can't ever really show anybody. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the ways that they keep you at the table. Then they shift the meta. The reason they got to shift the meta is so that you keep getting new cards. You keep buying the new cards. So they'll shift the meta by, with like, and this all comes from Magic the Gathering. They figured this out years ago.
Yeah.
But they would, you have type 2. It used to be called type 2 and type 1. Now I think it's called standard and standard legacy, and maybe it's still called type 1. Type 1 was everything goes. And type 1.5 legacy, that was everything goes except for a couple of specific cards that are super expensive. And then type 2 was the newest, I think the newest 2 blocks, which would be the newest 6 expansions, expansion packs, which would really only be about 1.5 to 2 years worth of cards. It was about 2.5 years when they were slow. Wizards of the Coast really started cranking them out. So you started to get 3 blocks a year, which means if you're playing standard, you were only playing cards that were like 9 months old, which means that you have to spend a ton of money to collect these cards to play your decks. And so they do the same thing with Hearthstone, which is they shift out certain cards and they bring in new cards. So what's the first thing you have to do when they have a new season or they introduce a new expansion? You got to spend $80 to buy a bunch of packs to get those important cards for the new shifted meta. You got to start breaking down all your cards to craft the new cards. You got to start spending money to stay on top of it. And if you're just one of those people that's like, I just want to do my daily quest, get my gold, maybe buy a pack every once in a while, you're never breaking out of silver, dude, because they changed it. You remember the rank used to be, you started at like 20 and you got up to legend.
Yeah.
It ain't that anymore. You start in bronze. They do this like bronze, silver, gold, platinum, diamond garbage now.
I see.
So you never know the rank of the person you're playing against. There's a hidden rank. You have like a hidden rank, which makes it real annoying. So, but anyway, if you want to break out of those lower ranks, you have to be on top of the meta early in the expansion. So the people who really play a lot, they're spending a ton of money to get all of the cards they need every time the meta shifts. They know that they can get people to do this. They do it on purpose. And then the other thing they do is what's called power creep. This is part of the meta shift, but it's a general thing. You're going to see it with every gacha game that you get. So you're going to see it with Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, any of those mobile games, ones I've covered, Fire Emblem Heroes, any of them. What they do is as time goes on, they come out with new units or new cards, new things you have to pull, new gachas that are stronger. They're just straight up better than the old ones. Mm-hmm. So every time those come out, if you want to stay competitive in PvP, you got to get those new ones, which means you got to pull a bunch of them, and maybe you'll get enough of them to like in Fire Emblem Heroes, you got to get a +10. You got to make them all +10, which means you got to pull you got to spend hundreds of dollars to get this like one character strong enough that you can be at the top level of the meta. Mm-hmm. They know this stuff, right? They're manipulating a lot of gamers this way. And so if you ever come across a game that's like that and you can feel that shifting meta, then plus them asking you for money to continue up with the meta, that's them keeping you at the gambler's table. That you're at a casino, and you shouldn't be at a casino. It's fun when you start, but you increasingly feel worse, and it feels harder and harder to let go of what you've done. If you were to look at Hearthstone, you open up your library in Hearthstone, you're like, man, look at all these cards I collected. They're not real. But you look at it as like, I can't just abandon this collection that I formed. Mm. I did this. I mean, I went through this with World of Warcraft. I was a heavy World of Warcraft player when the game came out. And so every time I quit the game, it was hard because I looked at my characters and I was like, this character has so much history. I've done so much on this character. Mm-hmm. These items mean something because I worked really hard to get them, even though there'd be items sitting in my bank that were completely useless, right? They were only useful for a couple of months when those were the best items in the game.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, why do I have them? I have them because I remember them. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I can't just delete my character. That character meant so much.
Mm-hmm.
It's not
There
real though.
was something you said earlier. Well, two things I want to ask about that. One is that you said consuming art when we were
Yes.
talking before we started recording, and that really stuck in my head.
Yeah.
There is, let's say, there's two images that I can present here. One is me sitting on my couch watching TV and not really paying attention to it, but I'm sitting there for, let's say, 3 hours watching a show and not really paying attention passively. There's a difference between that and active participation as an audience member. And when you said consuming art, I was thinking, okay, there's different types of entertainment. There's I'm going to turn my brain off and just veg out, and then there's I'm going to be intentionally paying attention to this. Like I'm actually going to be investing in this. And it sounds like what you're mentioning is that there's different types of experiences in a game like this.
Mm-hmm.
There's the gameplay loop. If anyone doesn't know, I actually used to work for game companies that made games with gotcha mechanics, specifically for this sort of thing. Is this loop of dopamine addiction, and then giving people a little bit of cortisol to like be freaked out by, but then give them some more dopamine so that they keep playing and they keep chasing that dragon of dopamine. That I would compare to vegging out on the TV in front of on the couch, let's say. I'm not really experiencing anything except a chemical high.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's intensely perverse. Like when I catch myself doing that, unfortunately, sometimes I still do it. I'm ashamed of myself because I think art, and what you said again, consuming art, should be something that is sacred and active. Are you? I guess if we could contrast, let's say on one end is the Hearthstone experience. What's a meaningful art experience?
Well, I mean that's a good question. So because we're kind of attached to games, it varies by the medium. But to me, I mean, art points to truth. So a meaningful art experience is one that enlightens you to the truth or reveals greater subtlety to truth which you already know. So if you're watching a story and the story is, say, a love story, and the love story really communicates to you well, like the cost of, the psychological burden of loving somebody who's broken, and maybe it's still worth it. Like you come to this conclusion from watching this love story, and you feel all kinds of emotions from it. That's a meaningful art experience because it's pointing to something true about us and our interactions with each other and our human flaws. If you're just playing a game, games can include, I mean, it's hard to say. So the art of the game is the gameplay. It's not just the art assets. And I know you're an artist, and so you might, maybe you get hired to make art assets. I hate calling them art assets, but that's the way that they think of them, right?
Sure.
Maybe
I say illustrations.
Yeah. You draw the sprites, so you're contributing to part of it. The gameplay is a big part of that total art, and some games don't produce the same kind of meaningful experience that a regular just story would, or maybe a really beautiful painting would. But there's really beautiful gameplay. There's gameplay that can make you feel those highs and lows, and that's not, to me, that's not a bad thing because life is full of chance, life is full of victory and loss. Gameplay, I think, produces its own effect. That's why we've played games always. Why is a video game significant? Why is winning or losing in a video game significantly different than winning or losing at chess? And the answer is it's not from an artistic point of view. Like there's an art to playing chess as well. There's a skill to playing chess. Mm-hmm. The art of chess is not the shape of the pieces, but rather the construction of the rules. The shapes of the pieces are there to enhance the experience as well. Just like how a movie presents a story and the visual experience is part of that to enhance the story. But if the story's rotten, then the special effects and great art team's not going to really save it. I don't know if you've ever watched a really beautiful bad movie, something like Avatar. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
That's an example.
Oh, that's a great exercise. I want to try to think of some. Man, there's many, I'm sure.
Oh yeah.
Jeez. My library's not next to me, but I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some that are just, great aesthetic experiences, but not maybe great art experiences. So anyway, I always tell people, you need to set time aside to make art. It's part of productivity. So I like to have, my fun stuff, my consumption of art be in a different room from my work on my PC. That way I'm not tempted to sit down and play games. Just as an example.
Yeah.
I come sit down on my computer. I'm here to work. I leave. I'm ready to do something else. So I think I had a whole chapter in this on the new book, The Keys to Prolific Creativity, which if you don't have a copy of this, I can give you a copy if you want it.
Yeah,
You probably already have all this stuff down, but it's because I meet so many people that are, really struggling to figure out how to find time to do their stuff. And you have to set aside time to consume art because that's part of what your creative cycle is. You need to have inputs in order to synthesize those outputs.
Sure.
Imagine since you're a visual artist, imagine you've never seen visual art. It'd be pretty much impossible to then make it. Certainly be difficult.
That happens. It's part of the like you said, the cycle. If I haven't consumed art or even just stared at something for a long time, like say I'm having a hard time drawing people for some reason, that's because I haven't been outside in months and I haven't been looking at people very much. So let's say the past few months I've been trying to draw certain books. For some reason I just can't draw a person because part of the cycle is I would go out to like a mall or something and people watch. Or I would go walking and I'd stare at trees and, oh, that's a cool cloud. I'm going to memorize that. It's like eating, putting fuel in a car. It's exactly what you're saying. I can't produce art that satisfies me if I don't consume. And there's like a certain ecstasy to like, oh wow, that building is so beautiful and look at these bricks. I'm just going to stare at these bricks for a while. And then one day I'll be drawing a brick and it's like, where did this come from? Oh, it was that one time.
Yeah. You remember all these experiences, or they become part of your, and a part of the landscape of your creative mind.
Yeah.
Like as a composer, it's like, I can imagine, I'm imagining an oboe playing this. You can't imagine an oboe without hearing an oboe, right? Because it's something that's itself, right? So it's important to consume art. It's important to take time to, especially whatever medium you're in. If you're a comic artist, you should be reading comics or manga. If you're, if you're a musician, obviously you should be listening to music. And if you're a filmmaker, you should be watching films. If you're a writer, you should be reading books. I also think it's great to play games or do stuff in other medium as well.
Yeah. I don't mean to demean, like, in case anyone's wondering, I love games. I think they're an amazing art form. I don't mean to make it sound like just playing a game is a lesser thing to do with your time. But one of the things that we could talk about, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but I think this is fascinating. Do you mind if we go a little over time?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay, because one of the things that we were talking about a few weeks ago was The Last of Us and zombie games and that sort of thing. But before I go in that direction, first I want to ask, just to close this topic, is on the topic of beauty and art. Let's, even with music too, because I love music. I don't know how to play any instruments currently. But I call it, just the ecstasy of consuming art. Like it'll move you. It's the most meaningful thing that I've ever done in my life, let's say, is if I'm listening to a song, it'll put me in this headspace where it's like nothing in my whole life can compare to that moment, And I chase that. That's my dragon that I chase. Or I'm looking at a painting or I'm reading a story where I'm just feeling this ecstasy. But what would you define beauty as? Like, what is this thing that we chase?
I'm not sure I can give you a great definition of beauty. I mean, it's something that we know. I'd say there's going to be a bunch of levels between the bottom level and the top level, but it's going to be, it's going to be that which points to the truth. Mm-hmm. And so that which points to the truth is going to be, for instance, a beautiful woman can be beautiful in a number of different ways, but we kind of understand that if she's deformed in some way, then that's not beauty, because it's not pointing to that ideal. It's not pointing to what the true idealized, platonic vision of what a woman is. So whenever we're looking at something that's beautiful, it's an ideal form of something on some level. So can something that's really ugly be beautiful? No, but it can be effective. So you can have ugliness as something that's effective in art. And this actually goes way back. There's Baroque art that features very grotesque looking people because it's very human and evokes a different kind of feeling, a kind of a pathos, rather than gazing upon something and having it be beautiful. Not everything you make has to be beautiful. It can still be effective. But where I think I draw the line is when the postmodern approach is there's no such thing as beauty, and anything that we want can be defined as beauty.
Okay. On that note, then, we discussed a certain genre of games, nihilistic games. But this also goes into storytelling, which is where I'm going to try to steer this. From a certain point of view, then, there are some storytellers, especially in our generation, who say sort of the thesis of their stories is that life sucks and everything is darkness. What kind of themes and patterns have you noticed in this vein?
Say that again.
How do I rephrase this? I'm sorry, I didn't phrase it well. It's when we talked about The Last of Us, for instance, zombie games. Yeah. These are nihilistic stories, and some people may argue that it's not really about that. It's about X, Y, and Z. But one of the things we discussed, you and I, is nihilism as a thesis for a lot of these stories. And you mentioned postmodernism, and when I think those two are hand in hand, as far as I'm concerned. Life has no meaning, therefore art should have no meaning, therefore we should all feel like crap all the time. I hate that.
I'll draw a line there. It's like nihilism is really like nothing has meaning. Postmodernism is meaning is relative, or meaning can be decided upon.
I see.
And that's a little bit different approach to the thoughts of art. If we're talking about something like Last of Us 2 possibly destroys the point of Last of Us 1, which is to say...
Oh, spoilers, by the way.
Yeah, you tell a story. I mean, I don't have to get deep into them, but you tell a story about certain characters under the presumption that their story is going to have a conclusion that's meaningful to them. And then when you decide to undo that and give them a conclusion that is the opposite of that all of their efforts were for naught, it doesn't feel very good, but it also just ends up with a story that's like, well, what was the point of telling the story? Mm-hmm. It'd be kind of like if you have 2/3 of the way through the story, someone randomly kills the hero and somehow the book continues going on. It wouldn't make any sense, because the whole point of a story is to tell a story about something that has a conclusion, that has some kind of meaning behind it. So if you're trying to tell something specifically that has no meaning, people don't end up liking it because that's not a story, That doesn't qualify as a story.
That just reminded me of No Country for Old Men. Did you ever read or see that movie?
Yes.
Yeah, that's odd, because I liked that movie, but I know exactly what you're talking about. But I suppose that movie tricks you, and that book tricks you into thinking this story is about this one character. But no, it turns out it's about something else completely. But that author... reading his books always makes me feel like trash.
Yeah.
What's his name? I forget. But anyway, he also did that post-apocalyptic... What's it? Anyway, doesn't matter. But
No Country for Old Men. So this is an interesting one. No Country for Old Men was good because of its style, not so much its content. And this is something that I think a lot of people... Because I'm an author and I deal with story a lot, I think a lot of people are way too focused. A lot of people that are, my YouTube subscribers or know me, they get sort sort of hyper focused on the importance of story, and then they get confused when I'm like, the story's not that important, when I'm like talking about a game or something. They're like, no, it's the most important thing. I'm like, not really. But like, the reason No Country for Old Men is good is because of its style. It's its execution of what it does. It's the way it visually tells the story. It's the lack of music, it's the acting, everything that goes together. It doesn't really tell a story about like a hero or anything like that. It's not really trying to. It actually tells a story that I think does have some meaning, which is, we don't have to get into stories, into the spoilers too much, but you have a set of characters with a set of assumptions, and it just kind of puts them into play, and they all suffer consequences because of the way that they view life. Be like, there's points to, say, The Godfather, even though like Godfather 2 ends on this very low note. That's about consequences. Sometimes you end on a low note because it's about characters having consequences for the way that they view the world. But it's mostly about the style. The style of the movie is just so good. I think this is something that a lot of newer, I shouldn't say newer, I think it's just a lot of people who are into movies don't think so much about the way the cinematography makes the movie work, the way the acting does. They don't, there's so many things that have to be bang on with a movie for it to be good. The story doesn't even have to be that great for it to be a great movie if the style can carry it and just make it awesome. There's all kinds of movies that I think have, like Conan the Barbarian. Great movie. Incredible score, beautiful cinematography, just great approach. It just has so much style. It's just such a stylistically awesome movie. It's not really a great adaptation of Robert E. Howard's Conan character. The story wanders around quite a bit, and then the acting is not necessarily that great. But man, it has some style. And you know what? All of the other movies that people thought were better from like 1983 or whatever, or 82, they've pretty much all been forgotten, and people just remember Conan the Barbarian.
I see.
It really, the style really carries it. And this is the truth about games too, is that gameplay is the most important thing. If your gameplay is not good, then there's really no reason to have a game. I think this goes back to Last of Us 2, when it's like, we don't talk about fun. We don't talk about fun in our games. It's like, fun should be the main thing. If not fun, then at least the gameplay should be compelling, interesting, make you want to keep playing. Gameplay is first. Aesthetics, I think, are second. Story, third or fourth, with music.
I suppose it depends on the genre too. Like an RPG, for instance. I saw that you were playing 7 Remake.
Yeah.
Did you finish it yet?
Yeah, I haven't finished it. I only play it on stream because I can only play really late at night right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, an RPG, I would say story might go a little higher.
Yeah, it might be a little higher, but even then, like if you have a great gameplay and great aesthetics, a lot of people just couldn't be bothered to care about a story all that much. They just want to bang through a really fun game. So I think if the game is beautiful and it has great gameplay, people will forgive you for a lackluster story. But they will not forgive bad gameplay because they won't finish the game. They'll be like, this game is awful, and they'll just turn it off.
I see. There's a design philosophy of the core gameplay loop or something like that, where it's every minute or so you have to give players something. They're doing the same thing over and over again that's supposedly going to be giving them that tickling that part of their brain that says this is worth it, this is fun, this is meaningful. And every different game has a different way of tickling that part. But I guess there's an outside-in type of design that you're describing where when you said style is the thing that stands out in our memories, in the case of Conan or something. I find that comics have that problem where a lot of people open the book because of the art, and let's say the art looks good or it's eye-catching or something like that. And maybe they don't realize that the story is not so good.
Yeah.
But being a storyteller yourself, I feel like part of the reason why I love your channel so much and why I became a subscriber a long time ago was because you're able to see things in stories that most people don't know that they're noticing. So, especially like with your critiques of The Last Jedi and that sort of thing, with or even before that, you were commenting on all sorts of problems that the Star Wars series had, for example.
Yeah.
What makes a good story, and what is some of the modern pitfalls that they're not even realizing that they're falling into these traps of bad storytelling habits?
Well, I think what it is there's a couple of them. So the first one is playing by the numbers. This is a big one with Hollywood movies. They, for whatever reason, I've worked with some people in Hollywood. They all like this terrible screenwriting manual called Save the Cat. And I see it's terrible on a couple levels. It gives you terrible advice for good stories, at least, especially if you want to make art that is meaningful and people remember. But it also is just terribly written. It's awful to try to read it. It's by a guy named Blake Snyder, who wrote such great movies, co-wrote one of like 5 writers on these movies. Stop or My Mom Will Shoot and Paycheck.
What was the second? I'm sorry.
Paycheck, I think. No, was it Paycheck? Blank Check. Blank Check. The one where the kid writes in $1 million on his check and then cashes it.
Oh, brother.
And like buys a house. Anyway, so he wrote those movies. So just that as evidence, is this a screenwriting manual for people who want to write bad movies that might get produced for a low budget? Yeah. But if you want to make something good, then you need to throw that out the window. You can't stick too close to the rules. If you're sticking hard to the rules, then you're going to produce garbage. And that's the first thing that Hollywood does, is they have this very predictable 3-act formula that they try to cram every freaking movie into. Even when it doesn't fit, they try to make it a 3-act movie with all these points, to the point where, like, if you go watch the Hobbit adaptations, they did this on all 3 movies. They tried to cram them into this like 3-act structure, and they're awful for it. It makes no sense. The story is just completely nonsensical with all the bastardization they did to it. So they get fallen into that one. And then the other one is that they try to just take a story and cram in things that don't have anything to do with the story, like politics, sexual orientation of characters, whatever, forced diversity kind of stuff. That's the second thing they do. So half the time they're amateurs who are really trying to just follow a guidebook for how to do a movie and aren't really interested in taking risks or doing something truly, truly good. And then the other half of the time, they view the movie as a vehicle for whatever their pet beliefs are. And both of those create bad conclusions. They produce terrible conclusions when you combine them. That's what you get with some of the more recent Star Wars movies, is you combine your bad politics with your inability to write anything outside the box. And you just get a movie that's both cliched and completely nonsensical and cringe at the same time. It's like, how could I predict a movie that would have so many bad plot points?
It's almost as if the new trilogy is like a clone. They're not introducing new DNA to the equation. They're just taking existing DNA and remixing it. Whereas I think the original trilogy, even though Lucas borrowed from so many sources, Japan over here, a little bit of, Hero's Journey and all that stuff, the old film serials from back in the day, Flash Gordon, he combined them in a very special way where it's like, oh, this tastes very fresh. And what you mentioned also reminds me of, say, Lord of the Rings, where that story was written because of a certain need that Tolkien had. Like, he didn't write it because he needed that paycheck or to get a book deal or anything. He wrote it because he wanted to. He was inspired to do it. And I think the new trilogy, for instance, was written just because it has to be written. Yeah. We have to write something. It was like, I don't mean to sound crass, but like, it's like making love without wanting to do it. There's no passion. It's just mechanical. It's wrong. But I appreciate a story that's written with a sort of, I have to write this story, and even if no one reads it, at least I got it out, Yeah. I think that's really meaningful. But on the topic of writing, and I didn't mean to interrupt. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that, though?
I don't think so. Yeah, I think the way to write a story, and there's no set way. You got to be willing to break the rules. It's all techniques, and you just want to be able to do something with an intended outcome. You don't want to flail your legs about and hope that you're swimming, or you're just going to sink to the bottom of the ocean.
Mhm.
So you want to know techniques, and that means paying attention to people like me, reading lots of books or consuming lots of art and seeing what other people did. This is really true of visual artists. Go look at paintings and see what, if you can physically look at a painting, it's even better, like in a museum. You can physically see what the artist did to accomplish the painting. What techniques did he do? And then you can use those techniques, but of course you're going to use them in a new composition, right? You're not going to paint the same painting. You're painting a new composition, but you might use his brush technique at this spot to get that effect that he had. That's the way to really approach, quote, the rules. There's no rules. There's just techniques with your intended outcomes with those. And when you master the techniques, you can count on the outcomes actually happening that you want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's sort of like technique is I had an old teacher tell me about, like, with comics, the most important thing to pursue is not skill or anything like that. It's clarity. It's say I need to tell a sequence of events that I don't know, I drop a cup of coffee and it spills, and then I meet my true love or something like that. The most important thing that you have to focus on is how do you tell the reader in pictures and words? How can they understand exactly what you're trying to tell them? And technique is the discipline, the study of the craft.
Right. It is the study of the craft. I like that. Yeah. It's knowing how the craft works. But if you know how the craft works, that doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to make a 3-act story and at 53 minutes into the screenplay, this is going to happen. This is how they treat them in Hollywood. They're like, they'll turn to like page 100 of your screenplay and see the event they're like, well, I'm looking for this event. And I'm like, why would that happen on page 100? And they're like, because it always happens on page 100. I'm like, no wonder movies suck.
Yeah.
No wonder you need Martin Scorsese. You have to hand Martin Scorsese something, because it's like very few directors get the ability to just tell good stories now. You just get kind of railroaded into, here's a 3-act script, make it happen on the screen. People buy tickets, they watch it, they go home, they forget about it. That's the worst, is if people make this joke about Avatar. People are like, Avatar, it's like, does anyone even remember this movie for how much money it made? It's like, I remember Dances with Smurfs. That's what I remember, it being really pretty, but I remember thinking the story was so stupid I could barely watch it.
Oh my goodness.
And it's a great example of like really ham-fisted, like just thimble deep politics, just it's like we're all, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into Avatar. It was a very, aesthetically, it was definitely an achievement.
Yeah. I remember only seeing it twice, and that's one of my metrics, not to get too deep into this rabbit hole, but I saw it once in the theater. I was so awestruck that I was like, I just had a revelation. Like, I've never been so deep in another world before because of the 3D stuff,
I mean, it's all about style. James Cameron knows how to make a movie have that stylistic impact. He really does.
Yeah. And it was funny because years later I saw it. I saw it on sale on Blu-ray, and I'm like, "Oh, I loved this movie. I have to see it again." And then I saw it on my regular TV. I'm like, "This movie's kind of boring."
Yeah, it kind of pulled out the aesthetic dimension. I think I had the same experience. I didn't have the same experience when I was watching it in the theaters. I'm like, "This looks so cool, but this is so dumb."
Yeah.
And there's like even plot holes in it that nobody caught. It's like, yeah, she shows up and gets him out of prison, like right after crashing a ship or something like that. I don't remember what happened. It's like, she shouldn't be there, but they just kind of rolled with it, and it's fine. Some people like it, but I think the point that like lots of people have just forgotten the movie makes it's like, oh yeah, I remember Avatar. It's like, that was a really huge moneymaker, but now it's just kind of like, oh yeah, I think I remember it.
Yeah, I guess we remember the experience more than...
I tell you the experience everybody remembers from the theaters was like movies like Jurassic Park and Heat, where people were like, years later, they still go back and watch those movies and are like, man, this movie's great.
Yeah. I like stories that get better with retelling. Like there are some
Yeah.
stories where once you know the twist, it's whatever. But then there are some stories that even though you know what's going to happen, there's a sort of, it's like doing laps on a really fun racing course or something. It's like, oh man, that really fun turn's coming. I can't wait. Or like you said, Heat or Collateral or a lot of Michael Mann movies. I'm not going to say any, but like there's something about just being in this world for a little while and being with these characters. It's like visiting old friends. I like that.
Yeah.
On that note, speaking of storytelling and craftsmanship and all that sort of thing, I don't know the full library of your work, but it seems that some of your recent stuff that you've put out skews toward suspense, horror, that sort of.
Yeah, I put out a
genre.
couple horror books. I mean, there's horror elements in a lot of my books. If you read Muramasa, which was I think that was my first published book. It's around here somewhere. It's got a lot of horror elements, even though it's a samurai fiction, but it has a lot of horror elements in it. I think you're thinking of Eyes in the Walls, which you can watch you can listen to the audiobook free on YouTube. I put it out there for people to listen to. And Voices of the Void from last year, coming up on the first anniversary of that one. I need to write a sequel to let people know what happens next. That one's definitely pretty strong horror. But I write a lot of fantasy. So next book that's coming out it's called Tyrant's Gallow. It's the sequel to City of Silver, which came out in November. And so it's going to be part 2 of, I think, about 6 or 7 books.
Oh my.
So I have written a bunch of them already. I just have to edit them because I wrote them years ago at this point. Yeah. And I got to bring them up to current standards. So this requires a lot of editing, rewriting, but the story's good. And I'm working on that, getting that ready to go. So yeah, mostly fantasy, science fiction.
Well, specifically, I wanted to ask about, because I'm mostly familiar with, say, Eyes on the Walls. You started doing the audiobook version, that sort of thing, and I love audiobooks. Last time we talked about that a little bit. I wanted to ask about your perspective on what makes things scary. For you specifically and for audiences, what do you think are some of the patterns?
What makes things scary? And
what makes that attractive to people?
It's an emotional high. Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of emotional high. So that's what people want from art, is they want an emotional experience. And so horror delivers a different emotional experience, obviously, than a love story, than a story of a hero or something. Horror delivers an emotional high and hopefully a meaningful emotional experience. Good horror will often make you ponder what's there, and that's something that I try to do with my horror. And one of the things about when I write horror is I try to keep the descriptions not minimal, but in such a way that the person really can imagine the things which are dark, rather than me having to describe something as being specifically grotesque. You give them the key details and people will imagine what is frightening to them as well. You give people an empathetic character that's in a situation where maybe they're like imagining an evil monster, or they think an evil monster is there. People can feel that because they maybe feel that when they were trying to go to bed as a kid. These are common experiences. Again, they point to a kind of truth that we're afraid of what goes bump in the dark. We're afraid of possibilities. When we try to predict the future, we, as part of that, predict the possibilities of our own death, how we might die. That's how we avoid dying. So horror, in a way, points to a deep truth about us, which is that we don't want to die and we want to avoid dying. And we have to think about these things so that we can avoid dying. As weird as that sounds.
No, that's really insightful.
Our thoughts about death, if we know that driving too fast is risky, so we drive slower so we don't crash and die. Because we can imagine crashing and dying.
Interesting. So it's almost like running a simulation in your head. What would I do in this situation?
Exactly. And that's great. Horror and suspense will do that. A great horror movie where they can really control the pacing. Maybe they just have the camera focus on a black spot in the set and nothing happens, people will start to imagine things are happening. They start staring at that black spot, trying to see if anything's moving in there that the director shot. Right? That's the technical mastery of great horror cinema. Great horror cinema, it's so far apart from trashy horror, it's like not even worth talking about. Real masters knew how to do that. Like instinctively, they knew what to point at to get people really scared. You watch a movie like Alien, you watch some of the Hitchcock classics. Hitchcock really knew how to do it. He knew that like it was about just having a dead space where there's no action happening. All of a sudden, people will start thinking about what's possible, and that becomes the most frightening thing of all.
Yeah, I've never liked the jolt, the boo. I think that's very cheap. But the kind of things that I won't say I enjoy it, but are you familiar with a manga artist named Junji Ito?
What did he draw?
The most famous thing is Uzumaki, one of the most famous spirals. He did a whole bunch of really grotesque and gory.
I think I've seen some of the art. I don't think I've read any of the manga though.
Okay, there's a couple of short stories. Well, when I think of horror, the kind of horror that sticks with me, like reading it in the moment is not especially scary, but then the more I think about it, like for instance, one of his stories is about, gosh, I don't want to waste your time by explaining this terribly, but like there's a crack in a mountain that appears, and all these people see silhouettes of humans, and they think it's like cave sculptures or something, but then some people show up and they realize, wait, no, that hole is me, that's for me. And some people start to like undress and they go into the holes, and then they get sucked into the mountain through these holes, and then it's like, where are all these people going? And then more and more people show up realizing that it's my destiny to be put into this hole, and they get sucked into the mountain, and it's like, where are all these people going? And I won't spoil the ending, but the ending to me was so horrifying that, and all of his stories do this, there's this feeling of doom and like, holy crap, there's no catharsis at the end of the story. It just keeps getting worse and worse. And then he ends it at the point where it's like, and now it's your turn. And I love stories like that because they stay with you. I don't like the boo scares because it's so cheap. It's like this dumb chemical.
Yeah, the difference between a master and an amateur is huge. Like slasher flicks versus real horror. It's hard to compare the two.
Did you play a PT by any chance?
PT? I don't think I did.
It was the Silent Hills game by Hideo Kojima, or if you're familiar with it.
I played Silent Hill.
Okay. There was a really famous first-person horror demo called PT on PS4.
I don't think I played it.
Oh man, if you can't play it now because it's been taken off PlayStation Store, but if you look up YouTube videos, it was one of the scariest. It was in the vein of Slender, sort of.
Okay.
But there's like this horrible ghost lady that follows you around in an apartment. Anyway, it doesn't matter, I guess. But I'm sorry to interrupt you. So there is a huge difference between master storytelling, especially with horror. I guess that applies to any genre, though.
Yeah.
I
mean, it applies to any genre, but I think it's really apparent in horror because you just won't produce the same emotion. It's just really not possible to produce the same emotional effect. So anyway, that's that. We probably need to wrap it up because I got to get going and have some dinner.
I'm so sorry. I didn't realize with the time zones. Please tell us about your work and how we can follow you if anyone's listening and hasn't already.
So you can find most of my books at dvspress.com. That's also my blog where I post a bunch of stuff. I'm a little more pugilistic on my blog, I think, than on the YouTube videos, but you can find me at youtube.com/rpmfidel. That's my main channel. And I got a lot of story writing content, video game content, reviews of books and comics and stuff that I think are worth talking about. And I always talk about them from a technical level, so you're going to get information that is going to be superior to what you would get, say, studying literature at the university, which is going to focus on things which aren't important for the craft. I really try to focus on the craft, like how do you write something good like this? How do you draw something good like this? I'm not really a visual artist. I do my own book cover designs, but I'm not too much of a visual artist. But I do like to look at art a lot, because I think anyone can glean a lot from how an artist presents an image and the emotion and the filtering that goes through that. So newest book is called Keys to Prolific Creativity. It's all about honing your creative process and being more productive day to day, and basically mastering your microprocess so that you could complete projects and build a career in the arts. That's really what I go through in this book, all the way from the little stuff of like how to, what you need to ignore in your life and what you need to focus on a day-to-day basis. Like, don't clean the mirror, write your book, something like that. Newest fantasy book is called City of Silver. I am coming out with a sequel to that called Tyrant's Gallow. I don't have it all set up yet, but that'll be coming shortly. And then newest horror book is called Eyes in the Walls, that came out in December. And you can listen to the audiobook for free on my YouTube channel, or buy the ebook for $2.99. And I don't know if there's anything else. I have free books as well. George actually did the cover of the Corona-chan Spreading the Love anthology. So that's got one of my books in it for free, called that I came out with last year, called Crown of Sight. So you could check that out. He did this great cover with this beautiful girl holding the world on it.
It was an honor.
Yeah, it was great. So we came out with it in a couple of days, and it's just awesome.
I'll put links to all this
number
in
one
the
on Amazon
description.
for a while. You're a number one bestseller.
Heyo. At least I can say it happened to me once.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll definitely have links to those in the description for anyone listening.
Okay.
All right, David. I'm so sorry that we went over time, but it was you're just so interesting to talk to. What can I say?
All right.
Thank you so much
appreciate
for
it.
your time.